bottom of my heart, I really think of a lot of you people in this room as my friends. I've gotten to know you all really well over the years, and this is literally my favorite place to come every year. I talk at colleges, I do different, events and such like that, and without a doubt, Orlando NORML is the best chapter. It's the gold standard for all the college chapters out there. If you guys want to learn how to do marijuana law reform, you come here. This is where it's at, and it's really my honor to be here every year, and I'm so glad to have you back. I'm glad to have you back early in the year. It's like you guys just started school, and here I am. Shit. It's funny, this is my, usually my busy time of year. Every August and September I start traveling around, and usually lasts for 2 or 3 months. So I was really glad to be in on the game coming here and to add this to the list. What happens normally in August is I start off every year by going to Seattle Hemp Fest. And I went to the Seattle Hemp Fest a couple of weeks ago, brought my daughter with me, we our 7th year out there. This year I was the MC on the main stage for about a 3-4 hour period, which is surreal. I mean, they have 150,000 people over two days, and you're getting up in front of, no kidding, 30,000, 40,000 people at a time, and you're talking. And this year, and I've done it every year, and this year, as I got to Seattle, my teeth broke, and I lost 4 teeth. And this is like the moment in which I'm going to do all these television interviews, I'm going to do this radio, and I'm going to get in front of people, and people are going to take my picture and all this shit, and the teeth broke. And that was God's way of saying, keep it real. So I did. So anyway, I won't have it until next week, so you got me toothless again tonight. I decided to incorporate that. In the past year, I'll get into this a little bit, the whole marijuana profession that I do has really dovetailed with my personal life in a lot of ways, and I'm going to try and incorporate that. Like I said, I think you guys are my friends. So can we talk for a moment? The teeth, I had a bridge in my teeth for almost 30 years. The week I graduated high school, I went down to the shore. You ever see the Jersey Shore? I was down the Jersey Shore. And we were partying. We were partying hard, smoking weed. I love weed right from the very get-go. I just graduated high school 2 years earlier, and we're smoking weed. And Janet Gommel came up, and she needed a ride 2 miles away. And I had a car. It was my father's girlfriend's car. It wasn't in my car. And she needed a ride. She was going to hitchhike out. It was raining. So I said, I'll give you a ride. So I got in the car. And I'm driving down, it's all pissy little rain, it's kind of foggy. I'm going down Route 35 down Seaside Heights, New Jersey. And she's talking to me, and I'm laughing, and I'm having a good time. And all of a sudden, she goes, Rick, look out for that. And there was a car, went boom! And I went, whoa, I hit this car. And I was 17 years old and stupid. And the very first thing that occurred to me, I looked up, and the car I hit was maybe 50 feet in front of me, and a little bit of flame coming out of the back. And I literally had I didn't even have my permanent license. I had just gotten my license. And being an idiot, I said, oh shit, I better get out of here. So I reached down for the stick, and I was sitting on top of the hood of the car with the steering wheel in my hand. Right? And all my teeth were knocked out. I literally flipped through the car, and I was sitting there, right? And I tell you that story because I haven't got teeth in my mouth, and that's the reason. I had them in from then until last week. They were almost supposed to last 20 years. They lasted like almost 20 years. But there's a moral to that story. I'm going to try and teach you a couple of things as we go along tonight, lessons that I've learned. I think in my time in life, I can talk to people half my age and offer a few lessons. And this is the first lesson. Anybody guess what my lesson is here?
Where's he?
Huh? Where is he? No. Take good care of your teeth. No. I took good care of my teeth. I went through a windshield to lose them. But the fact is, don't stoned. I was really stoned. Now, I'm saying that to you, and you're looking at me like I'm crazy. Why? Because you guys drive stoned all the time. Right? Right? Yeah, weird. Now, just let's be honest now for a minute. Who thinks they drive better stoned? Yeah. You don't. But there's nuance. It's not just that you drive worse when you're stoned. The fact is, sometimes you do drive better stoned. You're in the zone, man. You're doing it. Sometimes, but the trick is, it only takes that one moment where you're distracted. That one moment when Pretty Giant John was sitting next to you and you're trying to flirt with her, and then you're talking to her like this, and all of a sudden, wham! It only takes that one moment. And that's why they say, don't drive stoned. And I'm going to give you that advice. You're not going to listen to me. I know you're not going to listen to me. There's lots of things we do that we shouldn't do, and we do them all the time. Doctors and lawyers, their jobs are to tell us how to lead perfect lives. Don't do that. We get arrested. Don't do that. You'll get sick. And we do it anyway. We get arrested, and we get sick. We don't listen to doctors. We don't listen to lawyers. There's lots of things we do we shouldn't do. I am not a perfect person, and I don't hold it against I don't hold anybody else's imperfections against them as well. No bomb hits while I'm talking, all right? Oh, the bomb I'm thinking in terms of, in the past year I've thought a lot about marijuana smoking and at what age should we smoke marijuana? If I believe, and I do believe, there is nothing wrong with smoking marijuana, if I believe that marijuana is remarkably non-toxic, if I believe it is life-enhancing, which I do believe, if I believe it is non-addictive and that there's nothing wrong with smoking marijuana, at what age should we smoke marijuana? I'll bet you there's a bunch of people in this room who started smoking marijuana that are 13, 14 years old. Right? Yeah. Let's see some hands. Yeah, look at you, buddy. 13 years, what are you crazy? No, 13 years old, right? In fact, everybody I work with is half my age. And everybody I work with started smoking weed when they were 13, 14 years old. And almost to a person, these are good people. These are intelligent people. These are hard-working people. These are admirable people that I love dearly. I've never had a staff of working people that I have at High Times Magazine. Like I say, I'm the old man at High Times. Everybody's half my age. And just about everybody started at 13, 14 years old. So, once again, at what age do you start smoking marijuana? Well, my daughter turned 13 years old 2 days ago. Happy birthday. There is weed in her school. But last year, she's in 7th grade, we made national headlines in her school because some kid in 7th grade got caught with a cake with an edible. It was, I forget what kind of cake it was, but it was 7th grade. They were giving it around to 7th graders. In my daughter's school. My daughter was in 7th grade. Did you eat the weed cake? No, I didn't. Okay. You know, you can tell me, right? Yeah. Okay. Okay, so at what age? Well, here's the reality. I had to come to terms with this. I don't think my daughter at 13 years old should smoke weed. Now, everybody here probably did, or a lot of people, half the people will just raise their hands, you know, and everybody I know at High Times, they all started 13 years old. I don't want my daughter to smoke weed when she's 13, 14, 15 years old. I don't want to. But you know something? I don't want to be a hypocrite. My daughter knows what I do. She was raised here. She spent 7 years at the Seattle Hemp Fest. She was at the Seattle Hemp Fest. She filmed me the other day. It's on YouTube. But I don't want her smoking weed. She knows I don't want her smoking weed. But I don't want to be a hypocrite. So we talked about it a lot. And she said, well, why she knows kids that smoke weed. And she said, why don't you want me smoking marijuana? And I consider myself a very honest parent, and I haven't lied to her to the best of my knowledge yet. We'll see how that works out in the teenage years. but so far, I haven't lied to her. And when she asked me why I don't want her smoking marijuana, I was thinking about everybody I know started at 13 years old and how good and honorable and decent they were and hardworking they were and how I felt about marijuana. And to be honest with you, I didn't have an answer. I don't want you smoking weed, but I don't really know why. And I had to go through it in my head, and it took a while before I came up with an answer. Before the end of the night, I'm going to share the answer with you. But it took me a while to get to it, and I hope tonight I'm going to structure my talk in a way and get to the things I normally talk about. But that's really what's been going on in my head for the last 4 or 5 months, because this is what's been happening in my personal life. My professional life has dovetailed with my personal life. Suddenly, Dylan, my daughter, there's marijuana in her world. It's always in my world. And I had to explain to her this is Daddy's world. Don't tell anybody. Now, you can't even talk to school about it, and things like that. But now we're getting to the point where she does talk about it. Everybody knows. That's where, it's too late. It's done. So, the fact of the matter is that a lot of kids today, and a lot of kids historically, smoked marijuana very, very young. I interviewed Willie Nelson on several occasions, and I talked to him about pot and parenting. I was going through this, and I figured, who better to ask? Willie Nelson, you got 3 kids. What did you say to your kids? Matter of fact, pure coincidence, it went up on YouTube last night, and it'll be on High Times next week. You can actually see the interview with Willie Nelson, where I talk about this. And he said, well, you shouldn't do anything. You shouldn't smoke cigarettes, you shouldn't drink beer until you're 21. 21? I said, let's get back with that. 21? Is that really? Is that what you think? And he goes, yeah. He goes, after that, and you get the feeling he's a public figure and he doesn't want to offend anybody. He's got a lot of people, in the country world that he has to appease. And so it's a very political answer, really. So I said, so Willie, how old were you when you started smoking? And he goes, well, I was in Texas, and in Texas, there's all kinds of Jimson weed. I said, well, how old were you? 4. You were 4 years old. He goes, well, it wasn't weed. It was Jimson weed. It was different things you smoked when you were a kid in Texas. All right. And it turns out the first time he really smoked pot, he was about 15 years old. He was given to him by a musician. He was a young guy. In 1952, he smoked weed. I was 16 years old when I smoked marijuana for the first time. I am now 56 years old. I have smoked marijuana for 39 out of the last 40 years. I liked marijuana from the very first time I smoked it. And it was a blessing from my life. It was like a green light, going, this is your future. And the very first time I smoked weed, I was drunk. And I got on a Saturday night, I was a high school kid, and I went to a college. I went to a college party. And I wasn't supposed to be there. I was 16 years old, and there was old girls there at 18. And I couldn't believe I was there. I snuck in, and they passed it. But I was really drunk. I was drunk on bad wine. And I'd been thinking about smoking weed for 2 years. 2 years. It was 1960. And I had 2 years. Everybody around me was smoking weed, and I wasn't. And after 2 years of holding out, I decided I was going to do it. And that Saturday night, I found myself drunk up to college, and and they were passing a joint. And I remember it was 1969, and it was a strawberry paper, a pink strawberry paper. And for the next 2 years, I thought joints were like pink. and well, the next 2 months. So one of those pretty older 18-year-old girls handed me the joint, and I was drunk out of my mind. But I didn't feel it because I was drunk. I was drunk. So that was our Saturday night. On the following Tuesday, I was a young writer. I was always publishing at a very young age on local publishing society. And I had an interview in New York City at the Warwick Hotel with Brewer and Shipley. Anybody know who Brewer and Shipley is? Yeah? You'll know the song. They had a hit here, one hit. One Toke Over the Line. It's the opening song of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Yes. The very first time, one toke over the line, sweet Jesus. And it was a big double entendre, and I had an interview with them on Tuesday. I went into New York, and I said I had crossed the Rubicon after 2 years of thinking about this, and I had smoked a couple of hits, drunk at a party. And I went, and there was this interview in the New York hotel suite, and these guys are rock stars. Back then, we were rock stars. And I was there, and Paul Peterson, who was their manager, as I was sitting there interviewing these guys, and I had one tape recorder going, Paul Peterson pulls out a little tray and starts rolling the joint. I'm talking to him. The joint. I'm thinking, and they're talking to me, and I'm thinking, am I going to do it? Am I going to do it? Am I going to do it? And whatever they were saying, I didn't hear because I'm like, then they lit it up, they passed it to Michael Brewer, and Michael Brewer's talking and whatever. And they passed it to Tom Shipley, and you're talking, I don't hear a fucking word he's saying. Finally, the rock star hands me the joint. There you go. Now, some people don't get high the first time. You hear that? I didn't get high the first time. I had to go back 2 or 3 times. I got high. Backstage at the bitter end, and yeah. So I liked it, and I went out and I bought my first. Actually, I had a switchblade, and I sold the switchblade for $20, and I used it to buy my first ounce of marijuana.
$20? What the fuck?
Well, that's a lot of money in 1969. So anyways, I had an ounce of marijuana. I had a roll machine. I rolled 40 joints. I carved out a Bible. And I hid them in the Bible. So yeah, so that's how I was 16 years old, and I liked it, and it was a soup and a sandwich. And then, like I said, it took me 2 years to get to that point. Everybody else was, but I didn't do it for 2 years because I believed the bullshit. I believed the lie which was big in 1969, marijuana leads to harder drugs. Marijuana is a gateway drug. They've been telling that lie since before I was born. Since before I was born. I know the history of that lie. It started in 1948. And I believed it. But then I saw everybody around me getting stoned. It's 1969. And so I smoked it, and I liked it. And I wasn't worried about it being a gateway drug. It took me 2 years to make that decision. 2 years. By 1970, I tried Quaaludes, cocaine, speed, and heroin. What happened? A gateway drug. It was a gateway drug. It wasn't a gateway drug. What they say is a lie. And they repeat that lie today. It's a gateway drug that leads to harder drugs. When they say that, what they mean is, this is a quote. They say marijuana is a soft drug. You smoke marijuana, and then it becomes not enough for you. You want a better high, a bigger high, a harder high. And you you go on to something else. You got to get a better high, right? Well, within a year, and it was 1969, 1970, everybody was doing drugs. I had graduated to all the, it took me 2 years to make that decision, one joint. It took me months to get to all the other drugs. Now, how did that happen? If marijuana is not the gateway drug, that's a lie. Well, here's the nuance. And this is one of the other things I want to teach you. Take this with you for the rest of your life. The best way to lie is to tell something of the truth. Is to tell a little bit of the truth so you give it a little bit of a spin that, well, maybe it's true, that part's true, it sounds kind of true. In fact, marijuana is not in any way, shape, or form intrinsically a gateway drug. You do not seek a higher high. You do not look for a harder high. You don't graduate to something else. That doesn't happen. That's what they say. That is a lie. What happened to me, and what's happened to a lot of people, is that marijuana is illegal. Marijuana doesn't intrinsically lead to harder drugs. Being illegal, it's in the umbrella of illegal drugs. As soon as I crossed the Rubicon, as soon as I made that decision and I smoked weed, the same guy who sold me weed sold other illegal drugs. And now suddenly I knew where to get Quaaludes. I knew where to get cocaine. I didn't know that stuff beforehand. If marijuana was never illegal, marijuana would not lead to harder drugs or any other drugs. That is the big lesson to remember. You tell a lie, a big lie, by putting a little bit of truth inside it. And that's the point that they were trying to say, that yes, you will be led to drug culture through marijuana, but that's their doing. They made it illegal. In 1937, when they outlawed marijuana, there was no 15-year-old smoking weed. It was usually jazz musicians and guys in their 20s, women in their 20s. That was the culture, right? Now, as I said, most people I know started when they were 13 years old. That was created by the drug war. So, you got to understand, when you're fighting to legalize marijuana, in a very real way, you're fighting against people using hard drugs. In a very real way, you're trying to get that dynamic removed so that kids, 13, 14, 15 years old, who don't have experience under their belt, who don't have the ability to make rational decisions. Of course they have the ability to make rational decisions. They make mistakes. When you're a kid, you make mistakes. And when you have illegal drugs and marijuana under the same umbrella, you put your children at risk. Now I started getting to why I don't want my daughter to smoke marijuana. Well, there's other drugs out there. It's not that it's intrinsically linked to it, that suddenly she'll be part of the drug culture. And she'll be out there. My kid's pretty smart, though. You know, she's been around. And I really, to be honest with you, that wasn't the thing I was concerned about. There was something else, and I still didn't know what it was. And like I said, I'll get to it. I was 15 years old when Brewer and Shipley turned me on to marijuana for the very first time. That was in December 1969. In January 1969, I used to go to the Bitter End. That's where Brewer and Shipley were playing. In January 1969, I went to the Bitter End. I was a writer, and I could get in for free, and there was a great little club in New York. It's still there. Back then, now you go there now, it's a big tourist spot, and they serve drinks, and it's big. Back then, it was a little tiny hole in the wall. They didn't serve drinks. They let you smoke weed in the club. And they served the best ice cream sundaes. The best. Now, so I'm learning how to smoke marijuana. I like it. And now, over Christmas, I smoked a little weed, and now it's January, and I'm smoking weed. And I remember I had that first ounce. We had those joints rolled. We got 2 or 3 of them, and I got in the car to go across the river from New Jersey to New York. And we were smoking weed in the car. Joe Montagna was older. He was 17. He could drive. We were driving over to New York, going to the bitter end to see a young comedian who was in the process of revamping his act. And his name was George Carlin. George Carlin. Remember when you first started getting high? I really get high, and it's really great. Everything's funnier, and everything tastes better, and all the lights are brighter, and all the colors are brighter. Well, I was at that moment. And I went in, and I was sitting where you're sitting, and I'm me, and I was George Carlin. You were there, and George Carlin was working it. He had been a Las Vegas comedian who was straight and had a straight tie, and he had gone on the Ed Sullivan Show and everything like that. And he started smoking a little weed. He told me this. He started smoking a little weed. He said, this is bullshit. I'm not going to do it anymore. I'm going to just reinvent myself. And he was making $10,000 a week in Las Vegas as a straight comedian. And he said the word ass. And they charged him $10,000 fine and said, you can't do that. So the next night he went in and said, shit. And threw his career away, went to the bitter end and started reinventing himself. This was the beginning of the George Carlin we know and love. He started becoming, in my estimation, the funniest guy in the world. I'm smoking weed for the first time in my life. I'm sitting 8 feet. I got a bowl. I'm eating ice cream. And George Carlin is reinventing the comedic wheel in front of me. It was the funniest thing I'd ever seen in my life. What I didn't know at the time, it was the funniest thing I would ever see in my life. I have never seen anything like it. It was the perfect way to learn how to smoke weed. To watch young George Carlin. Now, as I said, it should have been the light on, here's your future. That light should have came down right there in the bitter end, right there. Because I turned into God's own pothead. And I spent years. The other drugs, I played around. I didn't like it. It was never an issue for me. Drinking was a bit of a problem. I haven't drank in 26 years. But other drugs, I messed around with other drugs. I messed around hard with other drugs. But, they really weren't an issue for me. I liked weed. Up until the time I was 30 years old, I liked to drink. I stopped drinking. After that, I liked weed. And then I got to be all through my 20s and 30s, kept smoking weed, variety of jobs, not really finding myself. I was playing music in a bar. I met a young woman, and we got together, and we got married. And she was 17 years younger than me. I was in my 40s, and she was in her early 20s. And she got pregnant, and I said to myself, oh, God, I got to get a job. A real job. I can't be playing music in bars anymore. I got to get a job. So I was writing for little tiny magazines. A little magazine I was writing for, a First Amendment magazine. I said, hey, would you like to interview George Carlin? Now, I am 42 years old, and I said, would you like to interview George Carlin? I said, shit, yeah. So, I get George Carlin on the phone. George and I hit it off right away. We were very similar people. We were fallen Catholics. We loved weed. We didn't like authority. And we just hit it off. And we started talking on the phone. After the interview, we kept in touch, and we started talking on the phone. And the magazine came out, and my wife was still getting more pregnant by the minute. And the baby was coming. I still didn't have a job. Finally, they offered me a job as an advertising salesman for American Lawyer. Right? I was going to go work for American Lawyer and sell advertising. And somebody said to me, hey, you did that interview with George Carlin. I said, yeah. He goes, you know him, right? I said, yeah, actually, we're getting pretty friendly. He invited me to a couple of shows. And I couldn't believe I was getting pretty friendly with George Carlin. And she said, hey, I know the guy at High Times Magazine. Why don't you ask your friend George case, I called George up. Hey, George, listen, I got pregnant. I need the money. And can I ask you some questions about weed? He goes, yeah, sure. So we did a second interview, and I got it on there, and I wrote it up, and I sent it in, and I didn't hear anything back. And so I was about to take the job. with American Lawyer. And that would have been me selling lawyer ads for the rest of my life. And then the person, my friend, called me up and said, hey, you got a fax machine? And this was 1991. And nobody had a fax machine, but I had one. And it was a brand new thing. It was like this big, you know? I said, yeah, I got a fax machine. She's going to turn it on. I got to send something. I said, okay. And I turned it on. And slowly I'm looking, and came over the fax machine. The cover of High Times magazine with George Carlin. And it was my very first national cover story. Make a long story short, they offered me a job, and that is how I got my job at High Times magazine. We went directly from the first time I smoked weed to I got a job at High Times magazine. High Times magazine. Now we get into High Times. I am the associate publisher of High Times magazine, the #1 marijuana magazine in the whole world. With High Times magazine for 13 years. It has been a trip. Right when my daughter was born, 13 years ago, I started working for High Times magazine. I know nothing about parenting except working at High Times. I know nothing about High Times except being a parent. They are parallel experiences to me. They are also mutually opposed experiences. But there it is. I started out at High Times magazine as the ad director. I sold advertising for a couple of years. Then in 2005, I was given the opportunity to become the editor of High Times magazine, to take all that writing I had done over the years. And they asked me if I would be the editor, and I became the editor. And during my tenure for 2 years, we increased the circulation by quite a lot. And they asked me what I wanted, and I said I'd like to be the associate publisher. We had a publisher who was doing the... I'm the last person at High Times that speaks dude. You know, you get to after me, it's all like business people who don't smoke weed, they don't want to talk about it, right? But I'm the last one, the culturated person. Make me the associate publisher and let me do what I want to do, and that's what I currently do. I'm the associate publisher at High Times. High Times has afforded me the only time I ever needed money in my life when my daughter was born. It has afforded me the only job I've ever had that's given me money. And it's not my luck, it's hers. You know, it is the best gig I've ever had in my life. I consider it the best job in the entire world. And those of you who have come here over the past 4 or 5 years to hear me have heard some of my stories. And I'm going to tell you a couple of them now, just to get along. High Times magazine is an adventure. It's not a job, it's an adventure. It's the #1 marijuana brand in the world. It's known all over the world. It's huge in Japan. Huge. I mean, you know, it's amazing how big we are in Japan. We are suppressed in New Zealand. They will not allow us in New Zealand. We are not sold in Australia, but they import what they call gray copies, and they put them all throughout the culture. Amazingly, because you can grow weed in Australia. Weed is legal. High Times isn't. We're big in Amsterdam, as you might well know. We're big in England. And in the United States of America, we are the #1 marijuana magazine. And for many years, we were the only one. And now there are literally a dozen in the United States. Most of them are regionals, but High Times is considered the biggest and still the best of that lot. High Times magazine was started in 1974 by the #1 marijuana smuggler in New York City. Those of you who have seen my rap before, I'm sure have seen or heard this story, but it's worth repeating. Thomas King Forsyth was a smuggler. He was a major smuggler. He said there's only two kinds of marijuana dealers in the world, those that need forklifts and those who don't. And I am the kind who needs a forklift. He flew the planes. He went down to South America and flew the planes. He brought them right in, brought in America. He was the #1 marijuana smuggler, the #1 marijuana dealer in New York City in the 1970s. He was an amazing character. He was a success at everything he did. He was a movie producer for his DOA, which is the first documentary on punk. He was a magazine editor and started the, I'm going to draw a blank right now, he started the Underground Press Syndicate, UPS. And that was where he took all the underground magazines in 1969 and made sure that they had similar stories in each one throughout the country. Very big success at that. He was a revolutionary who in 1972 went to Miami Beach for the Democratic National Convention and sold weed in the People's Park, which was across the street from the Miami Democratic National Convention. Young Keith Strock, the man who founded NORML, asked at the Miami Convention, he got himself a big going there. He brought NORML down there. He said, where do I buy weed here? He said, go over to the People's Park, under a eucalyptus tree. So he went under the eucalyptus tree, so here I can buy some weed here. And Tom Prasad was sitting up in the tree. He goes, yeah, what do you want? He said, I got like a dime bag. He said, yeah, give me the money. He handed him $10 and a dime bag. And Keith, as you know, was always in a suit and tie. He was a lawyer. Young lawyer started NORML, National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. It's 1972. NORML was 2 years old. He said, you're not a narc, are you? He goes, no, I'm a lawyer. He goes, you're a lawyer? He goes, yeah, I started NORML. And Tom jumped out of the tree. He knew it. He said, I'm Thomas King Prasad. At this point, he hadn't started High Times. He said, I know what NORML is. And he said, well, let's talk for a little bit. We talked, and before the 1972 Democratic Convention was over, Thomas King Prasad was the #1 contributor to the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. He gave lots of money to Keith Strock. He displaced Hugh Hefner. He was a drug dealer. He displaced Hugh Hefner as the #1 backer of NORML. Keith has some great stories of Tom Prasad. Just great stories. I mean, you know, I never met the man, but Keith knew him very, very well. And there was a great story in which Keith had needed money at one point. They were going to go under because he had turned the drug czar onto cocaine. It's a long story. And they were going to go under, and $10,000 in a paper bag appeared outside of the Merrill offices in Washington, D.C. Tom was a revolutionary. He was actually arrested at the Democratic National Convention for inciting riots. He took his money, his pot money, and put it back into politics. He was an old school guy in that regard. After he met Keith, he decided to pull back on the revolution and fund NORML. And from 1972 to 1974, he was the biggest contributor to NORML. And then, in 1974, Tom Prasad got an idea. He said, every time I sell a pound, I'm going to put out this magazine, and as a joke, we're going to give a magazine to everybody that buys a pound. And they printed up an extra 5,000 copies. He was a very entrepreneurial guy. That 5,000 copies disappeared like that. Sold in head shops throughout New York City. So they printed another 5,000. Disappeared like that. They printed another 5,000. Before they were done, they printed 25,000 copies. The first issue of High Times magazine, 1974. The mushroom, by the way, was bought at like the ShopRite. It's not a psilocybin mushroom. This now goes for about $600 on eBay. And I remember 1974 being at Mike Maldonado's house. You ever see the 70s show? So we show they're down in the basement, they're in the mom's house, and they're smoking the weed and they're around that. That was me. I'm exactly that kid's age. I was in Mike Maldonado's mother's basement, smoking weed, when Mark Pack came in and said, "Hey, look what I got! It's a magazine devoted to weed." Get the fuck out. Really? And I remember opening it up and we took turns reading it out loud to each other, giggling our ass off. We couldn't believe that there was a magazine we wanted to read. High Times Magazine, $25,000 for the first issue, $50,000 for the second issue. It came out as a quarterly from 1974. $75,000 for the third issue. They hit $100,000 by 1975. By 1977, they were selling 1 million copies a month. 1 million copies a month of High Times Magazine. If you are the #1 marijuana smuggler in New York City, the last thing you want to be is the publisher of a magazine that puts marijuana on its cover that sells 1 million copies a month. So he had to cut back on his smuggling in order to be a very, very, very successful magazine publisher. These were heady times, very heady times. As I said, Keith had the drug czar smoking weed with him. Jimmy Carter was president. They were going to legalize weed by 1977. By 1978, the drug czar got in trouble for snorting cocaine. He got tossed out. Jimmy Carter never touched weed again. Never talked about marijuana law reform. We dropped that ball at that moment. We never got it back until recently. And Thomas King Prasad, a brilliant man, had a seasonal disorder. He was the kind of guy who was in the dark days of the winter got very depressed, and in the summer he got his best ideas. And in 1978, in November 1978, in a whim that defies explanation, Thomas King Prasad took a bullet to his head and killed himself. He left behind a magazine, 1 million copies a month. He left behind a legacy and a fortune that his family had. His family were very, very conservative, military intelligence kind of people, very, very, professional military people. Tom Prasad knew rock stars, lawyers, pot smugglers, revolutionaries, journalists, revolutionary journalists, and they all wanted to come to his memorial on his untimely death. And so, they rented the top floor of the World Trade Center, windows on the world, and they had Thomas King Prasad's memorial with all those people on the top floor of the World Trade Center. And Keith Straught and the editors of High Times Magazine approached these very, very conservative family members and very respectfully asked for a portion of his ashes. And they acquired a portion of his ashes. And they mixed it with an ounce of pot. And they rolled and smoked the founder of High Times Magazine. I went to work for High Times Magazine in 1997. At that point, we had gone through 3 generations of marijuana smoking. We did not legalize marijuana in 1977. During the 1980s, marijuana kind of fell off the map as the Reagan administration came in and just say no, and the war on drugs really kicked off, and High Times almost went out of business. And then in 1989, the DEA's law judge, Judge Young, said that marijuana, they took the medical aspect of marijuana before the DEA. And the law judge found that marijuana had medicinal qualities. And he said it's remarkably non-toxic. And he said that it's something that we should look at for its medicinal qualities. And that was the beginning of what we think of as the medical revolution of marijuana. In 1988, the law judge said it. In California, they jumped on that like white on rice. And they started really pressing it. They started really pressing with Dennis Perone and the gay rights activists who were being devastated by AIDS. And they wanted something desperately. They desperately needed their medicine. So being that the gay activists had act up and things like that, they were really in your face with this. They took up the banner of medical marijuana and they pushed it forward in California in the early 90s, and that's where we finally got the beginning of medical marijuana culture that we enjoy today. At the same time, marijuana had a resurgence among college students. And that's when we started getting normal chapters in colleges. That's when they started making other inroads. Marijuana itself, High Times magazine had a lot to do with creating an American crop. When I was a kid, the only way you got marijuana was smuggled from Colombia, smuggled from Jamaica, or smuggled from Mexico. We didn't believe that you could grow it in the United States. Well, certain things got together. High Times magazine, we did advertising in there. Grateful Dead tour, started moving it around the country, and and there was also technology, grow lights, and nutrients and such, all came to fore around 1992, 1993, and today we have over 600 varieties of marijuana that grow in North America. When I was your age, 0. Today, over 600. Many of them are there for medical reasons. That came in the 1990s, and High Times once again took off and became a very, very popular magazine. I came in 1997, and when I came aboard, High Times was rocking. High Times was rocking, and Jack Herer was on the cover, and it was the #1 selling magazine in the modern era of High Times magazine. And we had gone down in the 80s. We were back in the 90s. We were selling big in California. Marijuana was big in California. High Times had a resurgence. So people started coming out of the closet. We needed rock stars. We went to rock stars. We went to the Grateful Dead. We went to rappers that came out. In 1998, I was sitting at my desk. 1999, I was sitting at my desk. And I got a phone call. Hello. It was Steve Bloom, who was then the music editor of High Times. It's Rick, it's Steve. Yeah. He said, "You got any weed?" Yeah, he goes, "You wouldn't get any weed?" I said, yeah. And one of my ad guys was downtown. As a matter of fact, I had a pot dealer right then trying to get us some weed. And he said, "Well, I'm at a cover shoot right now. And I'm with Steve, and we have no weed." He goes, I got budget. I got $500 budget. But I haven't got any weed. I'm going to go on the street and buy like $500 worth of dime bags. I said, "No, stay there. I'll see what I can do. I called up my partner, Mike. I said, "Mike, you go downtown?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, they got something? Yeah. I said, "Do me a favor. Borrow a pound of weed. I'll pick you up in 20 minutes on the street corner downtown. I'll be in a cab. I'll pick you up. Tell them we'll bring it back tonight. Whatever we smoke, we'll pay for. Just borrow the damn thing." Okay. So he borrows a pound of weed. Thank God it was good weed. And I get in the cab and I go downtown and Mike's standing there with his backpack and he's standing on the corner in New York City. Get in the cab. He gets in the cab. Stink, man, stink. Oh my God. Whoa. Stop. Alright, so we go midtown, and at the photographer, where Steve told me to go, was a penthouse. The photographer had a penthouse office. We went up to the penthouse and knocked on the door, and the door opens, and there's 13, 14, 15 people inside this room. And they're all doing this. Everybody's having a good time. They're all sitting around. And Steve Bloom looks over at me like, "Hey, Rick." He goes, "Hey." And I said, "We got it." And everybody went, "Woo!" Out the back, woo! Reba! You know? And Snoop Dogg's there. He's got his whole crew. He's got a whole bunch of people there, record people and whatnot. High Times photographer, High Times art director, Steve. So we start rolling blunts. And they start doing Snoop's hair. They're doing his hair and shit. We didn't get to the photo shoot for 2 hours. We just sat there blazing, one after the other, one after the other, one after the other. Snoop is a great guy. He's a really, really nice guy. We started talking about our kids, and then we sat there and talked together really well. I liked him a lot. Finally, after 2 hours, the High Times art director, we gotta go do the shoot. He goes, okay, cool, so they take Snoop and take him in the other room. So I'm still sitting there, I'm rolling blunts, I'm still hanging out. I'm guarding the weed. And as I'm there, this rather nice woman comes up to me and she goes, excuse me, are you the guy from High Times? I said, yes, I am. She goes, well, I'm from the record company. I just want you to know that there's no money in our budget for Snoop Dogg to buy weed. Okay, there's not going to be any weed in our budget for Snoop Dogg to buy weed. And I said, well, lady, look, I don't sell weed. I said, this is just for this weed. I'm a big pound of weed from you. I said, this is just for the photo and what we're here for, and when it's over, I'm taking it back. So you got no problem. He goes, okay, I just want you to know. So I'm sitting there, and I'm smoking the blunt, we're sitting there talking, we're having fun. All of a sudden, this other woman comes up to me. She goes, excuse me, are you the guy from High Times? I said, yeah. She goes, well, I'm Snoop Dogg's manager. I said, oh, how are you? She goes, listen, there's no money in our budget for Snoop Dogg to buy weed. I just want you to know that right now. I'm beginning to think this is a common problem. I say, no, well, listen, I don't sell weed. I'm not a pot dealer. This is about pot dealing. I never, ever, ever dealt pot inside High Times, outside High Times. You know, you don't ship me weed. I just did not ever do it when I was there. And it just doesn't happen. We'll get you high, we'll sell you the weed. And so I said, lady, we're not selling weed, I'm not a pot dealer, and this is leaving with me when I leave, and that's that. Okay, fine. Okay, so it's over. They got the pictures, it's cool, they all took pictures, here's the weed, Snoop, right? So then, I gotta go. I said we must have gone through a half an ounce, smoking and shit like that. We gave a couple of buds, that kind of thing, right? And we were leaving. So I'm leaving. We got Mike put the weed back in his backpack and we're leaving. And there's like 10, 15 people in the room. Okay, bye everybody. Bye everybody. I look over, Snoop's like where you are. And he looks over and he goes, and he ain't looking at me, he's seeing the weed is walking out. I never ever dealt weed in my entire tenure at High Times. But it was 1999, and I did this little equation. You do real fast in your head. I did this little equation. I'm looking at him, and he's looking at me. He's a kid, I'm taking his toy away. and I did this equation in my head. I said, he's the only #1 recording artist who is willing to smoke weed on the cover of High Times magazine. And I'm walking out leaving him high. So, I said to my partner, Mike, wait here. He goes, what? He knew the rule. He knew we weren't going to do this. And he said, what are you doing? I said, be cool. I walked over, I cut through the people, Snoop sitting on the couch, a big lanky guy, this little low couch, and I get close to him and I say, come here. Gets close to me, and I said, you want weed? And he went, fuck you. I said, you got money? He went, fuck yeah. I said, come on. So I go, Mike, come on. Mike's going, what? What? I said, come on. So Snoop gets up, Mike comes over across the room, and everybody knows what we're doing. We're not supposed to be doing this, but everybody knows there's 15 people. It's like, at a party, everybody goes in the room and goes, oh yeah, we know what we're doing. So they knew what we were doing, so I said, come on. So we walked in the other room, and I got the, and I walk in. Snoop had a cap on, a baseball cap, sideways, you know, and we sit down. I go up to a table. I said, Mike, bring up the weed. He's looking at me, right? So pull up the weed. Snoop looks at me and goes, how are we going to break it up? And I said, we will be men with each other. And I opened the bag and I reached and I grabbed a big handful of weed and I put it on the table. I said, make me an offer. And he said, $600. And I said, done. He pulls out a wad like a chunk of horse and he hands me 6 $100 bills. And he takes his cap off and he goes like this. And we got to know each other a little bit now. Over the years, we've lost track of each other. Came by the office a couple of times and hung out and whatnot. That was for a cover of High Times. Just smoking weed on the cover of High Times. Takes about 2 months to come out. 2 months later, it comes out. I'm going home. I'm in Port Authority, and and I'm going home one night, and there is the cover of High Times magazine, Snoop, and the Hudson News, and Snoop's body. Look at it. And right next to it is the Source magazine. And the Source has a picture of Snoop too. We're not talking weed, but he's on the cover of Source. And I go, wow, that's my friend Snoop on the cover of Source. And I said, now I've never read Source in my life, right? But it was there, so I bought a copy of Source. And I got on the bus, a crowded commuter bus, everybody's, I sit down, I open it up, I am quoting verbatim from the opening lines of the story. It was taken, he was in town doing publicity. He met with High Times, and next day he met with the Source. The opening lines of the Source cover story was, the sweet smell of marijuana drifts out of Snoop Dogg's hotel suite. Quote, yeah, says the dog, I just hooked up with the boys at High Times yesterday. I barked. I went, ah! Ah! The only time I've ever dealt with my life is on the cover. No, luckily, nobody at High Times read the Source, and you and I are going to know. Okay. And that was my introduction to celebrities at High Times magazine. Since then, there's been a whole number of them. We've done a lot of adventures. I've been a celebrity judge at the Cannabis Cup in Amsterdam. I got to know Willie Nelson. I interviewed him. I did 2 cover stories on Willie. We have lots of people that come up to the office all the time. It's too much to mention. It happens a lot. And it's been a ride. It's been a real ride. In the meantime, as you all know, marijuana, medical marijuana, has become legitimized. Since all through the 90s and all through the turn of the century, medical marijuana has become legitimized. Back in 1999, when I first started hearing about medical marijuana, to be honest with you, I've been smoking for a long time at that point, 30 years. I was skeptical. I thought, yeah, it's a term of art. It's medicine. Well, in the last 4, 5, 6 years, I have met a number, it's been my honor to meet a number of people who are patients. And marijuana, as you know, is good for multiple sclerosis. It's good for AIDS wasting syndrome. It's good for glaucoma. And there's 14 medical states right now, including New Jersey, my own state, the newest one. 14 states where there is some form of medical marijuana legislation and legalization. And they always have glaucoma, and they always have multiple sclerosis, and they always have AIDS wasting syndrome, and other things, cancer treatments and such. But we are finding out more and more now as the real deal starts coming down. We are finding out just how effective marijuana is as medicine. And whatever skepticism I had has totally disappeared because I've had, in addition to all the celebrities and all the fun we have at High Times, I have had profound experiences. I'm going to share one or two of them with you right now. Both of these have happened in the last year. Last February, we're at the High Times office, and we get a phone call. And normally, you know, we're not supposed to smoke in the office, and, you know, we're cool about it. You're not supposed to smoke anything in New York City in the office. You don't smoke, you know, so they know about it. So, you know, it's a real issue. You know? On this one morning, we got a phone call, and they had a convention in town of burn victims. There's 800 people in New York City at the New York City Coliseum who were burn victims all throughout the country, brought to New York. Now, some of them were, you know, they had burns on their bodies. Some of them were profound. Right? A lot of people had hand wounds, and of the 800 that were there, 10% regularly used medical marijuana to mitigate the symptoms of their condition. Of the 80, about 15 of them were between the ages of 18 and 25. And they had handlers and said, what do you want to do when you're in New York? And 15 of them said, I want to go to the office of the High Times magazine. So they called up and said, we have these burn victims, a little bit more than a dozen, and they're young people and they want to come in. And what do you say? You say, of course, yeah, bring them over. So we had about 15, 18 people come into the office. Now, as I said, it's a big issue. We're not supposed to smoke in there, and people know. They call our floor the 70s floor. And we're not supposed to be, you know, rocking out there as much as we might sometimes. But on this day, these kids walked in, and they were all between 18 and 25 years old. And when I say these were burn victims, these no face, guys with masks on, no arms. One guy had a motorcycle accident, flying in the air, landing, and just burned up. And he had no arms and a mask on his face. And this guy was the nicest guy in the world. When somebody's like that, and they're there with you, so what do you do? What do you do? First thing you do is you say, fuck it. And you say, let's get high. So we blew it out. Fuck them. Let them come in. Let them come in. Let them come in and tell me we're not supposed to do this. I don't care. I don't care. Tell them they're not supposed to do it. So we started hitting bong hits. We started rolling joints. And we went all day long. Just these kids. We didn't know we were going to do this at 10 o'clock in the morning or 12. These kids, you know? And I'm talking to this kid. And when somebody's, you know, has that profound a condition, it's funny, the thing you have to do is try to make them feel normal. Try to think, you know, you're looking at them, wow, this is horrific, but you're trying to make them feel normal. So I'm talking to them, I'm trying to ask them questions. We're getting high, inside 15 minutes you forget that the condition, and you're just getting high, just like you're having a sesh. And so anyway, I said to the guy, you know, when I get burned, you know, if I burn myself, if I smoke a joint, it makes it feel worse. You know, I feel it, you know, and marijuana is a sensual drug. It enhances the senses. And he said, no, you don't understand. When you have this kind of condition, when you have it, there's nerve damage involved. And the nerve damage creates an itching that's underneath your skin. And it never stops. And you can't get at it because it's underneath your skin. And it drives you crazy. And when we have this, the only medicine they have for it is narcotics. Hardcore narcotics. Demerol. They want to give these kids Demerol. Because I don't want Demerol. I don't want it. When I smoke weed, it goes away. Marijuana is a miracle drug when it comes to profound burns. That was one of the most inspiring days I've ever spent in my life, was hanging out effective and how much utility this plant has for so many conditions. And if I didn't think that was profound, a good friend of mine is Dr. Lester Grinspoon, Harvard University. We put out a marijuana magazine, Medical Marijuana, High-End Medical Marijuana. And I wrote a cover story, Dr. Grinspoon. He's 82 years old. He was the first person to write a book about marijuana in 1970, which actually spoke well of it. It's called Marijuana Reconsidered. He basically launched the entire activist era, because a Harvard doctor had underwritten what we were saying. Before Lester, we were all stoners. After Lester, we were activists, we were patients, and we were citizens who were demanding our rights. And over my years, I've gotten to know Lester, having been arrested in Boston. He came to my aid, and he became a good friend of mine. About 6 months ago, he called me up, and he hit me to a story. I'm writing it now. You might have heard about this. This woman who does not smoke pot, is not part of pot culture, is a single mother of a profoundly autistic. This kid banging his head against the wall until he bleeds, does not eat, is losing weight and dying. They got him on 12 different types of medicines. He does not talk. He's deep inside himself. The mother is a single mom. Her kid is literally dying in front of her. He won't eat, and is violent and such. Somebody says, why don't you try medical marijuana? She knows nothing about medical marijuana, so she goes online and she finds Lester in his book. And she writes to Lester Grinspoon and says, Dr. Grinspoon, I have a severely autistic boy, very clinical. Lester's a doctor at Harvard Medical School, and she gave him all of my doctor's names, and here's the conditions, and here's the many medicines they have him on. Nothing's helping. Lester writes back and says, look, as a doctor, I can't prescribe medical marijuana to you. I can't say, kid's 10 years old. I can't tell you to give your 10-year-old child medical marijuana. I will say, though, says Lester, if you decide to give your child medical marijuana, it won't do any harm. It is remarkably non-toxic. It is remarkably, there are no side effects. So, I'm not going to tell you to do it, because I can't. But if you decide to do it, I can tell you there won't be any lasting bad effects. She gets in touch. Lester puts in touch with us, and we find some growers in Massachusetts who make edibles. And we provide brownies to this woman. She takes a quarter of a brownie, and she gives it to her child. A very, very controversial giving a 10-year-old autistic boy. What happened immediately is he stopped being spasmodic and violent. Okay, calmed down. So, a few days later, she did it again. He started eating. He gained weight. She did it again. This kid has never spoken in his entire life and started uttering sounds. It's not speech. Sound. She wrote back and said, this is a miracle. My child was going to die, and now he's eating, he's gaining weight, and he's making sound. And over the next 6 months, they went from 12 medicines they were giving him to 9 medicines they were giving him, and they currently, I talked to her 2 weeks ago, 3 medicines they're giving you. And she has come public with what she has done. And she said, and so they interviewed her on ABC. Diane Sawyer interviewed her on ABC. And said, are you worried that you're going to get in trouble? Are you worried that the police are going to come? You're giving pot to your child. Are you worried? And she said, I'm already in a prison far worse than anything they could devise. Come and get me. And right now, of course, she's continuing. There's other mothers who are of autistic kids. There's another one in California, Rita Perez. There's another who are now coming out of the closet, giving medical edibles to their autistic children. And it seems to be a miracle drug for childhood autism. Lester has written a thesis for this for the medical magazines, and we'll see what happens. Right? There is no, of the 14 states of medical marijuana, nobody's addressing autism. Nobody's addressing childhood autism, and it seems to be a miracle drug. It seems to be the only thing that's working, and it's making profound differences in children who are deep within themselves, and in some cases violent, hurting themselves, not violent to other kids or anything, but hurting themselves. This isn't medical marijuana's efficacy. This is a miracle, and it's the closest I've ever seen in a miracle in my life. And that's happened now within the last 6 months. I'm telling you all this because you're here because you're marijuana activists. You're changing the law. Understand something. It's very easy to laugh at marijuana because marijuana is fun. You know, it makes us laugh. And it's very easy to get laughed at when you're an activist. Oh yeah, you're just trying to legalize your weed. Yeah, we are. Marijuana is recreational, and damn good recreation it is too. Marijuana is medical. There's 14 states that have attested to that through the law. But there, we are just beginning to scratch the surface of that. And it is likely, as we proceed into the 21st century, we're going to find uses for marijuana for cancer, which has been suppressed all of these years, going on 100 years now. It's suppressed. The first anti-marijuana law in the United States was Utah in 1915. So we're going to 95 years of legal suppression. And that is coming full circle now. So as you as activists, when you talk to people and they're laughing at you and they're thinking this is a silly thing, you remember Miko Perez, you remember that woman in Massachusetts, you remember that medical marijuana is in some cases a miracle. There's kids who have burn victims there. It's the only thing that's helping them get off narcotic drugs. And are you going to say no to a guy that hasn't got a face and hasn't got arms? You know? It's a miracle drug in a very real sense, and we're only beginning to realize how much of a miracle drug it is. High Times Magazine has put out medical marijuana. And it is, we just put this out, it's our 3rd issue. This one's out today. This is the 2nd issue. I wrote the story on Lester on it. And it is wrapped like Tom Persaud's first magazine. This one sold twice as much as this one, and the next one sold twice as much as that. And we believe this is the only national medical marijuana magazine that's out there. And we would, I have great, this is going to be what I do for the next 5 years of my life. I'm going to concentrate on High Times Presents Medical Marijuana News and Reviews, because this is really where the future is at when it comes to marijuana activism. The story that I just told you about autism will be in the next issue, which will be at December 1. I'm going to write it. I'm in the process of writing it myself. I have a book. I didn't write the book, but I wrote the forward, the name's on it. Cannabis Philosophy for Everyone. And it's a very high-end scholarly book. They went and found scholars from all around the world, pro and con. and Lester has the first essay in this, and I wrote the foreword. I'm going to read you real fast a paragraph. This came out yesterday. And I'm going to read you two paragraphs out of this. First, something I'm sure you've never heard before. It's not well known, but it's a really cool story. I tell my daughter of the Bashalanga in the 19th century, at a time of the dissolution of the great Luba Empire in Central Africa. A number of smaller kingdoms emerged. The Baluba chief, Kalamba Muskenge, subjugated neighboring tribes at gunpoint, and struggling to unify his new confederation, ordered that all the ancient fetishes to be burned in public, and in their place instituted the Bantu custom of smoking hemp to reincarnate the stone. The Baluba men gathered around the fire at the center of the village each night, and they solemnly smoked cannabis from huge calabash. And the tribal offender was publicly punished by being forced to smoke hemp until he lost consciousness. A tribal faction within this new coalition, the aggressive Bashalanga, led by Moambo Mapute, established the Benramba cult, the so-called Sons of Hemp, who quickly put down their spears and forswore their warlike ways. The Sons of Hemp quickly gained many followers. The Bashalanga became less violent, began to treat other tribes, and began to treat with other tribes and made more laws. The land of the hemp smokers along the banks of the Lulala River became known as Labuko, which is translated as friendship. And the partisans of Riamba are widely known as friends, and they greet each other to this day with the Bashalanga word for life, Moya. Marijuana took a violent tribe that was practicing genocide on its neighbors and turned them into the friends, and the Bashalanga. That was I found that in a book that was published in 1860 about Africa. I have one thing here. The point here in this essay that I wrote gets back to my original thesis. Why don't I want my daughter to smoke marijuana? If marijuana can take the Bashalanga and turn them into the friends, if they can take the warlike people and turn them into peaceful neighbors, if I believe marijuana is non-toxic, non-addictive, and a grace and a blessing in my own life, why would I not want my daughter? I say, certainly, will prices rise? We're talking about legalization. Will prices rise? Will prices drop? Will madness or laughter prevail? Certainly over 800,000 American arrests will fall off the radar when marijuana is legalized, and that can't be a bad thing. Medical patients will stop worrying about getting busted for medicine, which in itself will have a palliative effect. But will my teenage daughter be more or less likely to take up smoking pot after the criminal sanctions disappear? I don't know the answer, but I'm bedeviled by that question. Certainly, I worry more about other demons. I tell her that if she takes up hard drugs, she may very well die, because those vile pursuits have killed so many people. I tell her to be very careful of spirits, and wine, and whiskey, and beer, because those habits very nearly killed me when I was young, and perhaps the propensity lies nestled in her genes. I tell her if she smokes cigarettes, quote, I might just kill you myself for being that stupid. And then I smile, and you see how that works out. My many warnings regarding weed, however, are much less straightforward and far more fascinating, because I don't want to be a hypocrite, and because I believe that conversation is necessarily more philosophical. Why don't I want my daughter at 13 years old to smoke marijuana? Well, everybody here in this room is half my age. I'm talking to you now about the central problem of your generation. It has very little to do with marijuana, but marijuana informs that problem. I intuitively didn't want Dylan to smoke weed. Why not? Well, the answer is we live in the 21st century in a world of sensual overload. Our senses are assaulted. Your generation is assaulted by sensual stimuli. We have porn on the internet. We have information coming at us from 2,500 ways every other minute. We have drugs. We have alcohol. We have marijuana coming at us, and most kids are starting 13, 14, 15 years old. The reason I don't want my daughter is because it feels good. And when you're younger and you have sensual stimulus coming at you, you can get lost in the good feeling. You can get lost in understanding that this feels good, I'm going to keep doing it. I'm going to keep doing it. And when you're 13, 14, 15 years old, you don't have that experience under your belt to make that kind of decision, and you can get lost. This isn't just true of marijuana. You can get lost on the internet. You can get lost watching television. You can get lost driving too fast. You can get lost with sex. I feel the same way about marijuana with my daughter as I do about sex. I want her, one day, to have a wonderful sex life. Sex is a wonderful, wonderful pursuit, but it's a pursuit that is best when you get a little bit of experience under your belt. Because if you don't, if you start it too young, you become overwhelmed by the experience. And that's the same thing with marijuana. If you start it too young, you can become overwhelmed by the experience. What's the right age? Well, there's a place for everything, and it's called college. I don't know when I want her to smoke marijuana. I don't know when I want her to start having an adult sex life. I do know, somehow I said to her, it's like driving a car. You're 13, 14 years old, you can get into the family car, you can turn that sucker on, you can start driving down the road. You can probably even make 1 or 2 turns. But the fact is, until you get some experience, until you get some decision-making capabilities under you, the odds are you're going to crash that car. The odds are you're going to hurt yourself. The odds are you're going to hurt somebody else. Driving too fast is a sensual stimulation that is best had when you have a little experience, when you're 16 and 17 years old, 18 years old. Sexuality. Again, something else that kids are starting to do. There are sexually active kids in my daughter's class, 13, 14 years old. Why do I not want that to happen? Well, because you can make mistakes. And those mistakes, when you are sexually over-driven, when it's coming at you that fast and that furious, you've got to have some decision-making capability. You've got to understand, this is where I put the brakes on, this is where I hit the gas. Okay? And this is what I finally said to my daughter. Why don't I want you smoking marijuana? Because you don't have enough experience to understand when something feels that good. You don't have enough experience to understand when to pull back and say no to that. When, in the next couple of years, that experience will come to you. It'll come fast and furious. And I said, there's a place for everything, Dylan, and it's called college. We'll see how that works, because I'm not going to be a hypocrite. Everybody else is 13, 14, 15 years old. There can be people smoking in her school, and how can I say? I'm the associate publisher of High Times. I'm going to say, you alone shouldn't be smoking weed. You know? I told her I'm not going to get upset about it. But I'm very, very serious about wanting you to put it off until you have some experience. And you may, I'm talking to my daughter now, you may think, because you have watched me at the Seattle Hemp Fest for the past 7 years, and you've seen what I do for a living, you've been around High Times Magazine, might think that you have tacit approval from me to do these things. You don't. And so, 1 year ago, 3 days ago, on her 12th birthday, I took her out to dinner to the Waldorf Astoria, all nice and dressed up, and went to the Waldorf. So I said, Dylan, let me ask you a question. Do I smoke weed? And she said, duh. And I said, well, I'll tell you what. As of tonight, I'm not going to smoke weed anymore. And it's not because I don't like weed. I like weed. And it's not because I think there's something wrong with it, or I've changed my mind, or I'm tired of it, or I can't afford it, or none of that. I simply want you to understand it's not that important. What's important is changing the law. What's important is defending your freedom. What's important is not taking shit from anybody. That's what's important. Smoking weed's fun. But that's what it is. It's fun. In the case of the people that I'm talking about with medicine, it's a desperately needed medicine, but I'm not one of those people. So I've stopped. I'm going to end with one really quick story. I haven't smoked weed in a year and 3 days. With one exception. And I actually didn't smoke, but this is quite an exception. On the 18th of April, which is before 420, I was on assignment with High Times Magazine. I went to Aspen, Colorado. And in Aspen, Colorado, there is a chef. He owns the #1 restaurant in Aspen, Cash. And this guy is the best chef I've ever tasted food in my life. It's unbelievable. And he's the #1 restaurant in Aspen, which is saying something. World-class chef. And he's a world-class stoner. He loves his marijuana. And I met this guy a couple of years ago, and he said, why don't you come out here and I'll cook up some weed food for you. Really good hot cuisine. Now, I hadn't smoked for a while, so what I did was I got in touch with my friend, Anita Thompson, Hunter Thompson's widow. And I said, Anita, I need somebody to be my guinea pig. I want to write about this guy for High Times. So I'm going to come out, and we're going to go out, he's going to cook. She said, I want you to come to Owl Farm, where Hunter Thompson wrote all of his great books. And we'll have a private dinner there. So on the 18th of April, I had the honor of going to Owl Farm, where Hunter Thompson lived his life. And Chris Lander from Cash came and brought an incredible amount of food, 5 courses of hot cuisine. And he made sure, Dylan came with me, and he made sure that there was no weed in my food, and there was no weed in Dylan's food, but that the other people that were with us were going to do the weed food. Then, Anita, who's a good friend of mine, punked out on me. She said, I don't want to eat the weed food. I want to just... So I'm there with High Times Magazine. It was my job. I gotta do this. So, I said, Chris, I'm gonna eat the weed. 5 courses. Profoundly laced. Hot cuisine. One after the other. Incredible lamb. Incredible, I don't even, 5 courses. First course, delicious, wow, it's delicious. By the time the second course was done, I'm starting to feel it. I haven't been high and whoa, that's my old feeling. Third course, whoa, hey, wow, this tastes really good. Oh, man, this is the best I've ever tasted in my life. Fourth course, whoa, I'm getting really high. Whoa, God is kind. Let my daughter fall asleep in front of the beautiful fire in the beautiful living room with peacocks. There's peacocks in the living room. And my daughter fell asleep by the fire as I ate the 5th course. The 5th course, I got as high as I've ever been on cannabis in my entire life. There was a celebrity judge at the Cannabis Cup in Amsterdam, 40 weeds in 4 days of the best weed in the world. I got as high as I've been on cannabis in my entire life. So did Chris, by the way. Chris said, I've never been that high in my life. At this point, and none of it was uncomfortable. It was a wonderful experience. But when we were leaving, I just suddenly, I was like tripping. I was gone. You have to leave. We're going now. The car's here. The guy was driving us back. His voice was, the driver was talking, and his voice was in the air. So I was staying at the Ritz in Aspen, which is a very nice hotel, and my daughter was asleep when we were gone. And I picked her up, and they took me back to the hotel, and I picked up the daughter, carried her in, put her in the bed, and then I went to sleep. Okay? I went to sleep. That was on 4/18, night of Sunday, 4/18. I woke up the next day, and Dylan was playing on the computer, and I said, oh, Dylan, we gotta go to breakfast. She said, Dad, it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I said, okay, well, okay. Let's order room service, we'll get some food. She said, I'm still high. I said, okay, we got some food. And I said, okay, well, we're gonna go out in a little bit, but I'm just gonna lay down for a minute. Okay? Lay down for a minute. I woke up, it was dark. I said, Dylan, we gotta go to dinner. She said, Dad, it's 1 o'clock in the morning. I said, have you got to eat? Well, let's go ahead. And the only thing they would bring were eggs, since we ate eggs. I said, I'm just going to, you want to watch Avatar? Yeah, we'll watch Avatar. Put Avatar on. I never made it past the guy in the wheelchair. And I woke up, and it was 10 o'clock on 4/12. I slept for 38 hours. And I told her it was my job. And that's the end of my story. Thank you very much.